My father used to say that true silence has a sound of its own. It's not the absence of noise, he'd tell me, but the presence of everything that matters. The rustle of wind through tall pines, the gentle lapping of water against a wooden dock, the distant call of a lawn across the lake. That was the music he taught him to hear. After 30 years of chasing the worst kinds of noise a man can— sirens, screams, the cold, hard click of a closing jail cell door— I've come to understand what he meant. I came out here for that sound. Cabin sold, built by my father's hands back in the 60s, with nothing but good timber and a will of iron. The floorboards still creak in all the same places they did when I was a boy, running in with muddy boots. The air still smells of pine sap, damp earth, and memories after getting re-elected for a third term as county sheriff. I figured I'd earned a few days to be just Cole Mathis again. No badge, no radio, just a fishing rod, a cup of lukewarm coffee, and the soft hum of cicadas filling the gaps between thoughts. This place, this was my sanctuary, a piece of the world that hadn't been carved up, regulated, or ruined. There were no signs here, no rules posted on the trees. There was only the land, the lake, and the quiet promise of peace. But peace never lasts long when someone like Caroline Vance is around. I heard her before I saw her. A high-pitched electric whine that sliced through the morning calm like a surgeon's scalpel. A moment later, a golf cart the color of a radioactive lemon came rolling into view. Crunching over the pine needles, at the wheel, was a woman who looked like she was carved from a block of suburban entitlement. Perfectly styled hair, expensive athletic wear that had never seen a bead of sweat, and eyes that scanned my property like a hawk looking for a field mouse. A phone was mounted on a selfie stick, its little red light glowing. She was already live streaming. The caption, I imagined, was something dramatic and self-important, something like, "Protecting our community from dangerous intruders." Her voice was even sharper than the sound of her cart. "You there?" she barked, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me. "This is private HOA property. Silver Lake Estates does not permit unauthorized fishing. You need to leave immediately." I didn't move, didn't even turn my head. I just adjusted the grip on my father's old fishing rod and watched the bobber dance on the water's surface. Sometimes, acknowledging a problem just feeds it. Her voice climbed an octave, laced with the kind of theatrical indignation that only comes from someone performing for an audience. "Did you hear me? I am Caroline Vance, president of the Homeowners Association. I said get off this land." Behind her, two other women in matching polo shirts whispered into their own phones, their faces a perfect chorus of practiced outrage. I ignored them all. I reeled my line in a few feet, the familiar clicking of the reel, a comforting counterpoint to her screeching. "That's it. I'm calling 911, she shrieked, finally reaching the climax of her little performance. "You are trespassing on private property. I'm reporting a hostile individual who is refusing to cooperate. We'll see how tough you are when the deputies get here." She stabbed at her phone screen with a furious finger. I still didn't respond. I just took another sip of coffee. "My father taught me another thing out here on this very dock. You didn't argue with a storm. You just wait for it to blow itself out." She was a storm of her own making, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. She didn't know who I was. She saw a man in a flannel shirt and a worn-out baseball cap. A man who looked like he belonged ghettoed the past. She didn't see the 30 years of reading people of de-escalating cons, far more dangerous than this little show. She didn't see the badge and the weight of the office I had left locked in my truck. She was about to call my own deputies to come and arrest your sheriff. She thought she was bringing the law down on me. She had no idea that for the last 10 minutes, I had been patiently waiting for her to do just that. She had no idea I was the low end. I was about to bring it down on her. Now you might think I was just being arrogant, a man pushed too far on his day off, letting his temper get the best of him. But this wasn't about ego. It wasn't about pride. What Caroline Vance didn't know, what none of her 50,000 viewers knew, was that this little confrontation on the dock, it was an appointment I had been expecting all week. You see, this story didn't start this morning with the whine of her golf cart. It started 7 days ago at about 2 o'clock in the morning with a phone call to my office. My night shift dispatcher, a good woman named Maria, patched it through to my home line. She only did that for something serious. "Sheriff," she'd said, her voice tight with procedure, "we just received an anonymous tip, a detailed one. Thekla reported suspected drug trafficking and illegal firearms being stored at an abandoned cabin by Silver Lake." She paused, then read the address. My address, my father said, Bruce, even through the fog of sleep. My mind was sharp. In my 30 years of law enforcement, you learn a few things. You learn that petty criminals are sloppy and smart criminals are quiet, but you also learn that a lie that big, that specific, is usually meant to hide a truth that's even bigger. Nobody reports a non-existent drug den unless they want something from it. Usually they want the property condemned. They want the land. I didn't send a patrol car out. That's what they wanted. I just said, "Thank you, Maria, log it. I'll handle this one personally." The next morning, I did some quiet digging. It didn't take long. A few calls to the county clerk, a review of recent property transfers, and a new name kept popping up. Caroline Vance, president of the newly formed Silver Lake Estates Homeowners Association. An HOA that hadn't existed 6 months ago. An HOA that was now aggressively trying to annex every property bordering the lake into its jurisdiction, using a combination of legal threats and petty harassment. Her motive was as clear as the lake water on a calm day. My cabin, this little piece of history, was a thorn in her side. It was old. It was rustic. It didn't fit the vision of a pristine, manicured, and highly profitable lakefront community. She couldn't buy it. God knows my father had turned down a dozen offers over the years. So, she was trying to take it. Bethel's report was her nuclear option. Get the place raided, declared a public nuisance, and then sweep in with the HOA to seize it under some obscure bylaw she'd probably written herself last Tuesday. She was a land shark circling a piece of my family's history. And I decided right then and there that E wasn't just going to fend her off. I was going to let her get close enough to show her true teeth. So I took my vacation. I packed my truck, but I packed more than just fishing gear. In an old leather briefcase my father used to carry, I placed a certified copy of the original deed from 1962. I added a county plat map. Its lines clear and undeniable, and tucked right on top, waist crown jewel. A notarized letter from the original land developer dated 1991, explicitly and permanently exempting my father's property from any and all past, present and future homeowners associations. My father had been a smart man, hadn't trust people who like to invent rules. I came here knowing she'd show up. A person like Caroline Vance can't stand a loose end. She can't stand a property she doesn't control, and she certainly couldn't resist the urge to confront the dangerous trespasser herself, live on camera for all her-adoring fans. I was bait, and I knew she would bite. And now, here she was playing her part perfectly. I could hear her voice, still shrill and performative, feeding the 911 dispatcher a fantasy of fear and danger. Yes, he's still here, she squawked. He's just sitting there menacingly. I told you I think he could be armed. I am in fear for my life. I looked down at the worm wriggling on the end of my line. Menacing indeed. Each lie she told was another brick in the wall of her own prison. Each exaggerated gasp for her audience was another piece of evidence for the district attorney. She thought she was directing a movie where she was the hero. She had no idea she was Thester of a tragedy, and the final act was about to begin. The distant sound of sirens began to cut through the air, growing closer. It was a satisfying sound, the sound of a well-laid trap about to spring shut. But as I sat there listening to her weave her tapestry of flies, that old cop's instinct in the back of my mind started tingling again. The sheer desperation of it all. The fake drug report, the public spectacle, the risk she was taking. It felt like too much even for a land grab. It felt like a diversion. A woman this desperate. What was she really trying to hide? That question, what was she really trying to hide, would have to wait. Because right then, the sound of sirens was just a distant wail anymore. It was here. It was loud, and it was bouncing off the tall pines that surrounded my father's property. 2 county patrol cruisers crunched down Thegreville Path, their flashing, blue and red lights painting the trees in chaotic pulsing strokes of color. They parked at an angle, blocking the path, a standard pursuiter that suddenly felt deeply ironic. 2 deputies stepped out, their movements crisp and professional. The senior of the 2, a young but capable man named Reed, took the lead. The other was Sanchez, a good man, steady as a rock. Caroline Vance practically vibrate with vindication. She straightened her HOA polo shirt, puffed out her chest, and marched toward them as if she were a general greeting her troops. Her phone was held high, capturing every glorious moment of her impending victory. "Thank God you're here, officers," she declared, her voice ringing with authority. "This man right here, he has been trespassing on private Silver Lake Estates' property. I have repeatedly asked him to leave, and he has refused. He's been hostile and uncooperative." Deputy Reed, to his credit, was Albie's Innes. He gave her a short nod, his eyes already scanning the scene, taking in my simple fishing setup, my old truck, and me sitting calmly in a weathered Adirondack chair. "Ma'am, I understand," he said, his voice even. "We'll handle it. Can I see your identification, please?" As she fumbled in her purse for a wallet, still narrating for her live stream, Reed took a few cautious steps in my direction. He was doing bit by the book, assessing a potentially hostile subject. He moved with a careful confidence, one hand resting loosely on his belt. "Sir," he began, his voice polite but firm. "I'm Deputy Reed with the County Sheriff's Office. We've received a complaint that you're trespassing." His voice trailed off. He had gotten close enough now. The shade from the brim of my baseball cap no longer obscured my face. His eyes, trained to see everything, finally saw me. It was a beautiful thing to watch. First a flicker of confusion, then dawning recognition. His professional posture, so carefully maintained, snapped ramrod straight. His eyes widened just slightly. The hand that was resting on his belt dropped to his side as if head touched a hot stove. Behind him, I saw Sanchez's jaw go slack. Carolyn, having finally produced her driver's license, was oblivious. "Well," she demanded, her voice dripping with impatience, "what are you waiting for? Are you going to do your job and arrest him or not?" Deputy Reed didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on mine. He cleared his throat, and when he spoke, the authority was gone, replaced by a tone of profound differential shock. Sheriff Matthews, certain words were spoken quietly, but they landed in the middle of Carolyn Vance's triumphant performance like a 1-OPB boulder. What? She snapped her head, whipping back and forth between me and the deputy. What did you call him? Reed found his voice again, a little stronger this time. Ma'am, this is Sheriff Cole Matthews. The silence that followed was more profound than any quiet the lake had ever offered. It was a vacuum-sucking gulp, the air out of Caroline's world. Her perfectly mad-up face seemed to crumble in slow motion. The smug certainly drained away, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed horror. Her phone wobbled on its stick. The 50,000 people watching her live stream were now front-row spectators to her complete and utter humiliation. Slowly, deliberately, I stood up from my chair. I set my coffee cup down on the thick railing and took off my cap, running a hand through my hair. I gave Deputy Reed a small nod. Everything fine, Deputy, I said, and my voice, calm and steady, seemed to take command off the scene. Mrs. Vance here was just mistaken. I walked over to my truck and retrieved the old leather briefcase. I placed it on the hood, clicked the latches open, and pulled out the file I had prepared. She seems to believe this property falls under her HOA's jurisdiction, I continued, handing a set of documents to Reed. This is the original deed. This is the official county plat. And this, I paused, pulling out the last sheet of. This is a legally binding exemption filed in 1991. Permanently I clung. This parcel from any homeowners association forever. Reed took the documents, his training kicking back in. He read them carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. After a long moment he looked up, his face grim. He turned to Caroline Vance. Ma'am, he said, his voice now cold and official. Based on these documents, Sheriff Matthews is correct. This is his private property, which means you are the one who is trespassing. Her face, if possible, turned an even paler shady off-white, but she didn't back down. She shrieked a raw, desperate sound. No, it's a trick, it's a setup. This is corruption. You're all in on it together. Her little kingdom of Rulish had just been wiped off the map, but her reaction, the sheer panic in her eyes, told me everything I needed to know. This was never just about a piece of land. My job here was just getting started. A normal person caught red-handed like that would have been embarrassed. They'd stammer an apology, maybe try to laugh it off and make a hasty retreat. A normal person would have been humiliated into silence. But Caroline Vance wasn't a normal person. Her face now a ghastly shade of white, contorted into a mask of pure rage. That shrieking started again, but this time it was different. It wasn't performative anymore. It was the raw, desperate sound of a cornered animal, a setup. She screamed, her voice cracking, her eyes wild and unfocused, darted between me and my deputies. This is a conspiracy. You're all corrupt. He's a crooked cop and you're his puppets. She waved her phone, still streaming at my men. The world is watching this. The world says I are corruption. I held up a hand and my deputies, bless their professional hearts, stood their ground without a word. I watched her, I listened, and this wasn't the reaction of a woman who had simply overstepped her authority. This was the reaction of a woman whose entire house of cards was about to come crashing down. This was panic. The kind of panic that meant the 911 call wasn't the crime. It was just the clumsy attempt to cover up a much bigger one. I could have arrested her right then and there. Filing a false report, especially one involving a non-existent firearm threat, was more than enough, but that felt too easy. It was like finding a single spent shell casing at a crime scene. It's evidence, sure, but the real prize is finding the rifle it came from. Her panic was a loose thread, and I intended to pull on it until the whole rotten tapestry unraveled. I gave Deputy Reed a quiet, deliberate look. He understood immediately. Mrs. Vance, I said, my voice cutting through her tirade. Let's put aside the property dispute for a moment. I have another question for you. I turned to my deputy. Reed, do me a favor. Pull up the file on that anonymous tip we received last week, the one about this cabin being used for, what was it? Drug trafficking and illegal firearms. A new kind of fear flashed in Caroline's eyes. It was quick, but I saw it. She opened her mouth to protest, but no sound came out. Reed walked back to his cruiser, his movements calm and measured. I could hear the faint crackling voice of the dispatcher through his radio. The world seemed to hold its breath. Even the cicadas had gone quiet. Caroline stood frozen, her two cronies looking like they wanted to be anywhere else on earth. After a long minute, Reed returned holding his official notepad. Got it, Sheriff, he said. And the source of that anonymous call, I asked, keeping my eyes locked on Caroline. Did we ever identify it? Reed cleared his throat and read from his notes, his voice clear and precise. The call was routed through a series of proxy servers using a burner app. Sir, it was designed to be untraceable. He paused, but it wasn't perfect. Our tech guys managed to isolate the original IP address. It pings back to our residential service provider registered to the property at 24 Silverwood Lane, Illit. The address hang in the air for a moment. I let her feel the weight of it. Then I spoke, my voice low and cold. 2 for Silverwood Lane. "That's your home, isn't it, Mrs. Vance?" If she was pale before, she was translucent now. The phone finally slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering onto the wooden dock, but still streaming her horrified face to the world. She had been caught, not just in a lie, but in a premeditated, malicious, and criminal act. And her terrified silence confirmed everything. Her extreme reaction wasn't just about the HOA. It was about being directly linked to that false report, a report that was designed to bring the full force of the law down on this specific piece of land, a report designed to scare everyone away. While Reed and Sanchez kept the scene secure, I told them I was going to take a walk. My old cop's senses, the ones that had kept me alive for 30 years, were screaming at me. Her eyes, even in her panic, had kept flicking almost imperceptibly toward one spot down the shoreline. An old dilapidated boat that was technically on HOA common property. I started walking, my boots crunching on the pine needles. The farther I got from my cabin, and the closer I got to the boathouse, the more I noticed it, the smell. It was an acrid metallic scent that had no business being by a freshwater lake. The smell of rust and something else, something foul and chemical that stung the back of my throat. Then I saw the ground in a wide arc around the back of the boathouse. The earth was dead. The grass was a sickly jaundiced yellow. The ferns were brown and withered. The very soil looked sterile and poisoned, a dead zone stretching right down to the water's edge. The air here was still. No bird song, no insect hum, just a dead oppressive silence. I walked to the side of the weathered structure and peered through a grimy salt-stained window. It was dark inside, but there was enough light to see the shapes, dozens of them. 5-gallon drums stacked haphazardly. Some were rusted through with dark viscous fluid weeping down their sides, pooling on the dirt floor. I didn't need a lab test to know what I was looking at. It was industrial waste, illegal dumping, the kind of toxic mess that poisons groundwater for generations, the kind of crime that carries heavy federal. I stood there for a long moment, the pieces clicking into place with the cold, hard finality of a judge's gavel. The fanatical enforcement of rules, the desperate land grab, the fake drug reports. It was a massive criminal cover-up. It was never about my cabin. It was about keeping people, any people, from getting close enough to smell the poison. It turned and looked back down the shore. I could see Carolyn Vance still standing there, a small, pathetic figure guarded by my deputies. But I didn't see an annoying HOA president anymore. I saw Apollon, and I knew with the certainty of a man who'd seen this kind of rot before that I wasn't just investigating a false report anymore. I was standing on the edge of a federal crime scene in that moment, standing there by the poisoned earth. Everything changed. The quiet vacation was over. The personal dispute over property lines was irrelevant, a childish squabble in the face of this. This was bigger than Micah Ben, bigger than Caroline Vance's petty tyranny. This was about the lake itself. The water my father had taught me to fish in. The water that families had swam in for generations was being poisoned by greed. The anger that rose in me was cold, sharp, and professional. It was the anger of a lawman, not a landowner. I turned on my heel and walked back toward the scene, my mind already working, lining up the dominoes that were about to fall. I keyed the radio on Deputy Reed's shoulder myself. My voice was different. The wary Vassar was gone. The sheriff was back on duty. "Dispatch, this is Sheriff Matthews," I said, my voice flattened hard. The dispatcher's voice on the other end, normally calm and routine, jumped a notch. "Sheriff, go ahead, sir. I need a secure perimeter established at my location. Effective immediately, we have a suspected hazardous material situation at the Silver Lake Estates Community Boathouse. I want this entire shoreline taped off. Nobody in or out without direct authorization. Contact the State Environmental Protection Agency. Tell them I need a hazmat team on Saturday. Also get a judge on the line. I need immediate warrants for the property at 24 Silverwood Lane in the aforementioned boathouse. The probable cause is illegal disposal of toxic waste, public endangerment, and obstruction of justice via the filing of a false police report." The orders flowed out of me, precise and final. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Caroline's face, a mask of disbelief and into abject terror. She finally understood. This was no longer about Affan or a trespassing violation. I walked over to her. Her and Krenisha had long since scurried back to their golf cart, watching from a safe distance. She stood alone, guarded by Deputy Sanchez, looking small and utterly defeated. "Mrs. Vance," I said, my voice quiet, which somehow made it more menacing. "How long have those barrels been in that boathouse?" A choked sob was her only answer. Her eyes, which had once flashed with indignation, were now just hollow pits of fear. "All right, Sanchez," I said, turning to my deputy. "Detain her. Read her rights. She's no longer a person of interest. She's a suspect in a federal environmental crime investigation." While my deputies handled the situation at the lake, a different kind of fire was starting to burn through the community. News in a small town travels faster than a brush fire in August. And the spark was Caroline's own livestream. The video of her humiliating confrontation with me and her subsequent detainment had gone viral among Teresa. For the first time, The people she had bullied for years saw a crack in her armor. They saw she wasn't antable, and that was all it took. The phone lines lit up. Decades of suppressed anger and resentment came pouring out. Complaints about fraudulent fines, threats of legal action, stories of harassment. It was an avalanche. By early afternoon, an emergency town hall meeting had been called at the local community center. It wasn't an official HOA meeting. It was a citizens' revolt. I was busy coordinating with the state agencies, but I heard all about it later. I saw the recordings. The room was packed, standing room only. The air was thick with the kind of collective anger that can move mountains or tear down tyrants. The first to speak was Wallace Gable. He's a 72-year-old retired schoolteacher who's lived by that lake his whole life. He stood up, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from rage. "I've known this lake since I was a boy," he said, his voice echoing through the silent room. "And I've watched for the last year as this woman, this predator, has poisoned it both literally and figuratively." He looked around at his neighbors. "Cheffoned me $500 because my grandson's tricycle was left on my own driveway." She threatened Ellen Gable with a lawsuit because her roses grew an inch over the property line. "But that's not the worst of it." Wallace took a deep breath. "I did some checking after mirroring in with her. Caroline Vance isn't her real name, or rather, it's one of many. 15 years ago, she was Caroline Peters, a real estate agent from the next state over. She lost her license permanently for wire fraud and embezzlement. Thishu, it's just the same old scam with a new coat of paint." A roar went through the crowd, but the knockout blow was yet to come. A young woman named Sarah, Wallace's granddaughter and an accountant, stepped up to a projector she had set up. "My grandfather asked me to look into the HOA's finances," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "What I found belongs to all of you." An image flashed onto the screen behind her. It was a bank statement from the Silver Lake Estates HOA account, and projected for all to see were the expenditures. Thousands of dollars at designer boutiques in the city, first-class airline tickets to tropical resorts, payments on a luxury vehicle, all of it paid for by the residents' monthly to sand her fraudulent fines. As the crowd gasped in unison, my team, armed with warrants I had secured, was moving in. It was a two-front war. While the community was stripping away her social power, my deputies were dismantling her criminal enterprise. The hazmat team, now on scene, confirmed my worst fears. The barrels contained a cocktail of toxic solvents and heavy metals actively leaking into the groundwater. The boathouse wasn't just a storage facility. It was an environmental disaster in progress. Meanwhile, at 24 Silverwoodland, my other team was executing the search warrant on her house. In a locked office, they found everything: the real thing, records showing the systematic embezzlement, contracts with an out-of-state disposal company that was paid pennies on the dollar to make toxic waste disappear, and tucked away in a desk drawer, the burner phone used to make the anonymous tip against my property. The rifle a week later had finally been found. She had built an empire on fear and fine print. She had ruled her little patch of the world with an iron fist and a selfie stick. But that night, as the evidence mounted and the full scope of her crimes came to light, the people she had bullied for years finally saw that the Empress hadn't a close. Her reign was over. All that was left was the cold, hard reality of Argyle Cell, and a reckoning that would be remembered in this county for a long, long time. A reckoning, I've learned over a long career, doesn't always come with a thunderclap. Sometimes it arrives quietly in the sterile click of a deputy's handcuffs and the calm professional reading of a suspect's rights. The chaos of the town hall meeting faded. The roar of the crowd subsided, and what was left was the methodical, unglamorous process of the law. Caroline Vance's arrest wasn't a spectacle. There were no more cameras, no more live streaming. Her audience was gone. She didn't shriek, or fight, oath, bluster. All the manufactured outrage had evaporated, leaving behind a hollowed-out woman who seemed to shrink inside her expensive clothes. As Deputy Reed led her to the back of a patrol car, the people from the meeting watched in silence, not with cheers, but with the sober, weary relief of a community that had just survived a long storm. Justice, when it finally arrives, is often a quiet affair. The charges, however, were anything but quiet. I sat in my office for the next 2 days, aversing in the mountain of paperwork. The list was long and damning. Wire fraud, embezzlement from the HOA totaling over $200,000 and 15 cents, counts of filing false documents with the county. And then came the heavy ones: 27 federal counts of illegal disposal of hazardous materials under the Clean Water Act, each one carrying a sentence that could put her away for a decade. To top it all off were the charges that started this whole mess: filing a false police report and obstruction of justice. Her house of cards hadn't just fallen, it had been obliterated. The Silver Lake Estates' HOA dissolved within a week. It ceased to exist, its authority vanishing the moment its queen was dethroned. Their ridiculous rules about trash can placement and the color of garden gnomes became what they always were: meaningless words on a piece of paper. People started talking to their neighbors again. There were block parties. There was a sense of liberation, of a fresh breeze blowing through a stale, oppressive room. I held one press conference. The local news channels were all there, hungry for a soundbite. Framed sheriff who got arrested on his own property. I disappointed them. I didn't talk about me vacation, my cabin, or my personal feelings about Carolyn Vance. I stood before them as the sheriff of Oak Ridge County. The law in this county is not a weapon to be used for personal gain, I said, looking into the cameras. It is a shield meant to protect every citizen equally, whether they live in a mansion or a cabin, built by their father's hands. Mrs. Vance's actions were a betrayal of her community and a danger to public health. She will be prosecuted to the fullest. The extent of that law, or primary focus now, I concluded, is working with the EPA to ensure the full and complete cleanup of Silver Lake and to restore the public's trust. And that was that. I let the lawyers and the environmental scientists take over. My job, the messy part at least, was done. A few weeks later, I came back. I parked my truck in the same spot. The air felt cleaner, lighter, or maybe that was just the yellow police tape that had cordoned off the shoreline was gone, replaced by the professional fencing off EPA's remediation team, working down by the old boathouse. The sounds of their equipment were a low, steady hum, the sound of healing. I walked down Tooth Dock, the old boards groaning a familiar hello. I sat down in the Samadran chair. The water was calm, catching the late afternoon sun in a way that made it look like liquid gold. I baited my hook. The simple practice had moments, a meditation in themselves. I thought about my father. He would have hated the circus that had unfolded here, but I think he would have understood what I had to do. He taught me to be a quiet man, but he never taught me to be a silent one when it mattered. He believed that a man's character was measured by how he handled trouble when it came knocking on his door. I cast my line out, the lure making a soft plop. As it hit the water, the ripples spreading out in perfect concentric circles. The sound echoed in the quiet, the true quiet, the kind my father had talked about. The kind that's filled with the presence of everything that matters. A gentle tug on the line startled me from my thoughts. It wasn't a big one, just a little nibble, a sign of life, a promise that the lake, like the community around it, would recover. I smiled. In the end, I got my peace. It wasn't the easy, quiet peace I had come for, but a different kind. An earned peace forged in the defense of something good. It was never about her rules versus my rights, or her land versus mine. It was much simpler than that. It was about right versus wrong. And in my line of work, that's the only line that truly matters. The rest is just noise. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alex Stories.